The wind howled, slicing through the empty streets like a knife. Footsteps crunched against the ice, hurried until they stopped. A sound, faint, desperate. Was it just the wind, or something more? Eyes scanned the swirling snow. Then, a shape, barely visible under the street lamp's flickering glow. A trembling golden retriever curled around two tiny puppies, shielding them from the biting cold. Who left them here? How long had they been waiting? A phone buzzed. A choice loomed. Turn away or step into the unknown. This story will move you in ways you never imagined. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment and be part of this journey with us. May this story bring warmth to your heart. Now, let's begin. Chapter 1. A life-changing opportunity and an unexpected choice. The wind howled mercilessly through the snow-covered streets of Jackson, Wyoming, turning the quiet town into a frozen wasteland. The streetlights flickered against the swirling white, their dim glow barely cutting through the relentless storm. The snow had already piled high on the sidewalks, burying everything in sight under a thick, suffocating blanket of ice. Daniel Hayes pulled his coat tighter around his frame, bracing against the biting cold as he stepped out of the cafe. The warmth of freshly brewed coffee still lingered in his hands, but it did little to shield him from the brutal winter air. This was the moment he had been waiting for. An exclusive interview with one of the most powerful political figures in the country, a man rumored to be at the center of a multi-million-dollar corruption scandal. It had taken months of persistence, countless dead ends, and a fair share of professional risk to get to this point. And now it was within his grasp. If he nailed this, his article would make national headlines, front page, prime-time interviews, a career-defining moment. As he adjusted his scarf and stepped onto the icy pavement, his mind was already rehearsing the questions he would ask, the angles he would take. This was it. Then, just as he reached the curb, he heard it. A sound so faint, so easily lost in the roaring wind, that he almost didn't notice, a weak whimper. He stopped mid-step, his breath visible in the freezing air. Had he imagined it? The wind carried so many sounds, creaking signs, rustling trash, distant car horns muffled by the storm. Then it came again, faint, desperate. His journalistic instincts kicked in, an ingrained habit of always noticing the things others ignored. His eyes swept the deserted street. Nothing. For a brief moment he considered moving on. Whatever it wasn't his problem. Then, from the corner of his eye, he saw movement. Under the dim, flickering light of a street lamp, a golden retriever lay curled in the snow, her frail body shielding two tiny puppies nestled against her stomach. The wind blew fiercely around them, yet the mother didn't move. Her focus was singular, unwavering. She was too weak to stand, too exhausted to do anything but keep her pups pressed tightly against her for what little warmth she had left. Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. He wasn't the first to see them. A car had passed just moments ago. Its headlights had briefly illuminated the mother dog before moving on, disappearing into the storm without a second thought. Another pedestrian, bundled in layers, had glanced in their direction before quickly looking away, pretending they hadn't noticed. Daniel's feet felt like lead as he stood there watching. Why did he feel the same impulse? To keep walking, to pretend he hadn't seen, to convince himself that it wasn't his responsibility? His fingers hovered over his phone, where his editor's last message glowed on the screen. "Don't be late, Hayes. This is the one." He clenched his jaw. This was the one. His defining moment. The interview that could change everything. He could turn away, just like the others. But then, as the wind howled through the empty streets, a memory surfaced, sharp, intrusive. A winter night, a different street. His father's voice, firm yet distant. "We can't help everyone, Daniel. You need to know when to walk away." He had been 12. Standing in the back seat of his father's old station wagon, watching as a homeless man shivered on the sidewalk, begging for $1. His father had driven past without slowing. "The world doesn't wait for people like him, son, and it won't wait for you either." Daniel had learned that lesson well, but now, Staring into the golden retriever's weary, pleading eyes, he wondered if it was a lesson worth unlearning. His heart pounded. He had two choices: keep walking, secure his career, and never look back, or stop, help them, and risk losing the biggest opportunity of his life. The snow continued to fall, thick and heavy, as Daniel stood there, caught between duty and conscience. What would he do? Chapter 2. A suspicious sign. The storm roared around him, the decision pressing like a weight on his chest. For the first time in his life, Daniel Hayes ignored his father's voice in his head, the warning that had shaped his entire career. You need to know when to walk away. But this time, he didn't walk away. He crouched beside the trembling golden retriever, his breath coming in ragged puffs of condensation in the freezing air. Her amber eyes held his, weary but trusting, as if she understood what was happening. The two tiny puppies, nestled against her stomach, barely moved, their fur dusted with frost, their small bodies shivering uncontrollably. Daniel reached out slowly. The mother flinched, her muscles tensing, but she didn't growl. He murmured softly, a quiet reassurance that neither of them understood, but both needed. With careful hands, he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the mother's frail frame. She barely weighed anything. Scooping up the puppies, he cradled them close to his chest before lifting the mother in his arms. She didn't resist. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he hurried to his car, the wind biting through his thin shirt. His phone buzzed in his pocket, probably his editor, impatiently waiting for an update. He ignored it. The meeting was over. The story was gone. As soon as he opened the car door, warm air rushed out, misting against the icy wind. He carefully placed the mother and her puppies on the passenger seat, adjusting the coat to cover them as much as possible. The mother dog gave a weak whimper, but made no effort to move. The puppies barely stirred. Daniel sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly for a moment before exhaling sharply. His chest felt tight, not just from the cold, but from the irreversible choice he had just made. For the first time, he had chosen something not for his career, not for success, but because his heart told him it was the right thing to do. He put the car into gear and drove into the storm. A warm haven. By the time he reached his house, the storm had intensified, blanketing the streets in thick snow. The tires crunched against the icy driveway as he pulled in, headlights casting long shadows against the darkened windows of his home. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that reminded him just how alone he had been for the past few years. Tonight, though, he wasn't alone. Daniel shut off the engine, quickly stepping out and opening the passenger door. The cold hit him instantly, but he didn't care. His focus was on the fragile lives in his arms. Inside, he wasted no time. He carefully laid out old towels near the radiator, making a warm nest for the mother and her puppies. As he unwrapped them from his coat, he noticed the slight trembling in his hands, not from the cold, but from something deeper, something that felt almost like fear. What had he just done? What had he risked everything for? As he knelt beside them, the mother dog shifted weakly, curling protectively around her pups. The warmth of the room had already begun to revive them. One of the puppies let out a tiny whimper, its body twitching slightly in sleep. Daniel sat back on his heels, rubbing his hands together to chase away the lingering chill. Now that the adrenaline had faded, his mind began to catch up. Something wasn't right. He had seen stray dogs before, animals abandoned because they were no longer wanted, left to fend for themselves. But this mother, she wasn't just abandoned. She had been hurt. Scars and questions. Daniel leaned in closer, his journalist's eyes scanning for details. Now that she was no longer buried in snow, the injuries were impossible to ignore. Scars. Not the kind that came from wandering the streets too long. These were deliberate. Thin, healed lines ran across her back, almost symmetrical, marks of a dog that had been restrained for long periods. There was a faint outline on her neck, the unmistakable shadow of where a collar had once been, far too tight for far too long. Then his gaze shifted to the puppies. The smaller of the two, a delicate golden-furred pup, had a raw, red wound near its throat. Daniel frowned, gently touching the fur around it. It looked like a rope or chain had been tied there, cutting into the skin over time. Someone had left them like this. Not just abandoned, dumped, and not just anywhere, left out in a blizzard. Daniel exhaled sharply, his mind racing. Who would do this and why? He knew cruelty existed. He had reported on corruption, on injustice, on human greed and violence. But this? This was different. This was personal. He reached for his phone, hesitating for a brief moment before opening the camera. He snapped a few photos of the injuries, not because he needed evidence, but because he felt a deep, unshakable instinct that this story wasn't over. Someone had wanted these dogs gone, and Daniel intended to find out why. Chapter 3. Clues in the Scars. Daniel stared at the photos on his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. The scars, the wounds, the silent story they told. His gut told him this wasn't just a case of an owner neglecting their pets. This was intentional. This was cruelty. He exhaled, scrolling through the images once more. The thin, jagged scars across the mother dog's back. The faint indent around her neck, where a collar, or something much worse, had bitten into her skin for too long. And the wound on the tiny puppy's throat, the unmistakable mark of a chain or rope tied too tightly. Daniel clenched his jaw. He needed answers. Without hesitation, he opened his messaging app and typed a name. Lisa Carter. She was one of the few people he trusted completely. A veterinarian, an animal rights advocate, and his closest friend. If anyone could make sense of these injuries, it was her. He attached the photos and added a short message. Lisa, take a look at this. Something doesn't feel right. The moment he hit send, his phone buzzed almost immediately. Incoming call. Lisa Carter. The truth behind the scars. Daniel answered, pressing the phone to his ear. Please, tell me this isn't one of your gut-feeling cases. Lisa's voice came through, half exasperated, half concerned. Daniel glanced at the golden retriever mother, who had finally fallen into a deep sleep beside her pups. I wish I could, he muttered. I just saw the pictures, Lisa continued, her voice tense. Daniel, these injuries, this isn't just neglect. This looks like... She hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. Like what? Daniel pressed. Lisa sighed. Like a fighting dog. Daniel's stomach twisted. You mean... Not her, Lisa clarified. She's too small for that. But she could have been used for breeding. And those scars, those look like restraint marks, which means she was probably kept in chains or a confined cage for long periods. And the puppy... She paused. The wound near its throat. That's exactly the kind of injury I've seen on dogs that were tied up too tightly for too long. Daniel rubbed his temple. So you're telling me she wasn't just dumped. She escaped. Lisa's silence was answer enough. Daniel's grip on his phone tightened. Someone had used this dog, abused her, and when she was no longer useful, they threw her away, along with her babies. He took a deep breath, pushing down the anger bubbling in his chest. He needed more information. Lisa, do you know of any operations like this in Jackson? Lisa hesitated. Not officially, but there are always rumors. Illegal breeding rings, underground dogfights, backyard operations where animals are treated like disposable tools. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, already feeling the journalist in him waking up. If this was an organized operation, someone must be profiting from it. Lisa's voice was grave, and someone must be covering it up. A name surfaces. After hanging up, Daniel sat in front of his laptop, fingers tapping impatiently against the desk. He pulled up a search engine and started digging. If there was even a whisper of an underground dogfighting ring in Jackson, someone had to be connected to it. He started with the usual suspects: old police reports, animal control records, news articles about past illegal breeding busts. But everything led to dead ends, until he found a name. Derek Marshall. The moment he saw it, something clicked. A local businessman with a history of suspicious animal dealings. Officially, he owned a dog training and breeding facility just outside of town, but unofficially, His name had surfaced in multiple investigations regarding illegal dog trading and animal abuse, but nothing had ever stuck. He had connections, he had money, and he had power. Daniel's jaw tightened. If Derek Marshall was involved, this was bigger than he thought. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. This wasn't just about a mother dog and her puppies anymore. This was a story. And Daniel Hayes had just found his next lead. Chapter 4, The Undercover Investigation. The sky over Jackson had cleared, leaving behind a brittle winter landscape, frost-covered trees, roads slick with ice, and a silence that felt unnatural after the storm. But Daniel's mind wasn't on the weather. He gripped the steering wheel of his car, parked a safe distance from Marshall Kennels, the so-called dog training facility owned by Derek Marshall. From the outside, it looked almost respectable. A long gravel driveway leading to a series of fenced enclosures, a large barn-like structure at the center. If you didn't look too closely, it seemed like a legitimate business. But Daniel knew better. With a deep breath, he adjusted the hidden recording device in his coat and stepped out of the car. Time to see what Derek Marshall was really hiding. The visit. Daniel walked up to the gate, feigning casual confidence. A man in a heavy jacket and worn-out boots stood nearby, eyeing him suspiciously. "Help you?" the man grunted. Daniel forced a polite smile. "I heard you sell strong breeds, guard dogs, protection animals. I'm looking for something serious." The man narrowed his eyes but seemed to buy it. "You'll want to talk to Derek. Follow me." As he stepped inside, Daniel's stomach tightened. The stench hit him first. Wet fur, unclean cages, something rotten underneath it all. Rows of metal kennels lined the property, each housing a dog in varying states of distress. Some were emaciated, their ribs pressing against their skin. Others had scars, fresh and old. A few stared blankly, too broken to react. He felt rage bubbling under his skin, but he forced himself to keep his expression neutral. This was worse than he imagined. The deal. A door creaked open, and Derek Marshall stepped out. Daniel recognized him immediately from his research. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. A man used to being in control. "Who's this?" Derek asked, his voice carrying a mix of suspicion and amusement. "Says he's looking for a protection dog," the man beside him answered. Derek gave Daniel a slow, assessing look. "You new to this?" Daniel kept his face blank. "I know what I want." Derek smirked, seeming satisfied. "Good. Follow me." He led Daniel toward a separate enclosure, away from the others. Inside, a group of dogs paced restlessly. These ones were different, larger, muscular, with a certain alertness in their eyes. "Trained for security," Derek said. "No nonsense, no hesitation. They'll do whatever you need, if you know how to handle them." Daniel forced himself to nod, glancing around. Every inch of this place screamed cruelty. But then he heard voices. Derek turned toward a side entrance to the barn where a shadow moved. "Give me a second," he muttered, disappearing through the door. Daniel waited a beat before moving quietly, positioning himself near the edge of the barn to listen. The conversation that changed everything. Inside, Derek was speaking with someone, a man whose voice Daniel didn't recognize. "You sure it's handled?" the man asked. Derek scoffed. "Yeah, the reporter never showed. The whole setup was wasted." Daniel's pulse spiked. "The reporter?" The man sounded irritated. "That was a risk. If he had walked into that meeting, he wouldn't have walked out." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. They were talking about him, the interview he had missed, the political scandal he was supposed to expose. It wasn't just a meeting, it had been a setup. If he had gone, he might not have made it out alive. His grip on the barn's wooden frame tightened as he processed the chilling realization. Derek Marshall wasn't just running an illegal dog operation, he was connected to the very corruption Daniel had been investigating from the start. The weight of it hit him like a punch to the gut. His choice that night, the decision to save a mother dog and her pups, had unknowingly saved his own life. He backed away, his heart hammering. This was bigger than anything he had imagined, and now he was right in the middle of it. Chapter 5. exposing the truth. Daniel paced his living room, his mind racing through every piece of evidence they had gathered. The photos of scarred dogs, the financial records linking Derek Marshall's kennel to underground gambling, the coded transactions hinting at something even darker. He had spent years chasing corruption, but this was different. This wasn't just about greed. It was about cruelty, power, and a system designed to protect those at the top. Lisa sat at his kitchen table, reviewing the files again. "We have enough, Daniel. This isn't just about Marshall's illegal kennel. This is an organized operation. We take this to the police now, and they'll have no choice but to act." Daniel exhaled slowly. Once they crossed this line, there was no turning back. He picked up his phone and dialed. The raid. Hours later, Daniel stood outside Marshall Kennels, his breath fogging in the freezing air. Blue and red lights flashed against the snow as police officers stormed the property. From where he stood, Daniel could hear the sound of locks snapping, the crash of doors being kicked open, the shouts of officers securing the area, and then the barking, not angry, not aggressive, just desperate. The sound of dogs who had spent their lives in fear, suddenly hearing something different, hope. Lisa rushed past him, following a group of officers into the main barn. Her veterinarian instincts taking over, she didn't hesitate. Daniel, however, hesitated just for a moment. This was it. Everything they had worked toward was unfolding before his eyes. Then, the unmistakable sound of a struggle. He turned just in time to see Derek Marshall being dragged out of his office, his hands already cuffed behind his back. "You think this is over?" Derek snarled. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Daniel took a step closer, his heart pounding. "Then why don't you tell me?" Derek gave him a cold, knowing smile. "You're just a pawn in something bigger, Hayes. You should have stayed out of it." Daniel clenched his fists. He had heard threats before, but this one felt different. More than just dogfighting. Inside the barn, the horror unfolded. Cages stacked on top of each other, filled with dogs in various states of suffering, some too weak to stand, others with fresh wounds, recent victims of fights that had taken place right here. Lisa knelt beside a trembling pit bull, murmuring softly as she examined his injuries. "We need transport now," she called to an officer. "Some of these dogs won't last the night." Daniel turned away, his stomach twisting. He had expected it to be bad, but nothing had prepared him for this. And then, the discovery that changed everything. One of the officers emerged from Derek's office carrying a laptop and a thick folder filled with documents. "We found something," the officer said. Lisa glanced at Daniel. "Something worse?" Daniel took the folder and flipped it open. His blood ran cold. Names, political figures, business leaders, large sums of money being transferred through offshore accounts, and then his own name. Lisa saw it too. "Daniel!" He barely heard her. Because next to his name was a date, the same date as the interview he had missed. The setup. If he had gone that night, he wouldn't be standing here now. Lisa exhaled shakily. They weren't just protecting Marshall's operation. They were eliminating threats. Daniel looked around at the wreckage of the kennel, at the dogs being carried to safety, at the man who had orchestrated all of it being loaded into a police car. He had stumbled onto something bigger than he ever imagined. And now he was in the middle of it. What happens next? As Daniel stood in the cold night air, watching the last of the evidence being taken away, he knew this was far from over. The dogs had been saved. Derek Marshall was in custody. But the people behind him? They were still out there. And now they knew his name. Daniel sat at his desk, fingers tightening around the stack of documents spread before him. Each page told a story more horrifying than the last. Dogs beaten, starved, forced to fight for entertainment, winnings from illegal betting laundered through shell companies, and worst of all, the names attached to these transactions. Derek Marshall wasn't just a cruel businessman, he was part of something bigger. Lisa, sitting across from him, ran a hand through her hair. "We have enough, Daniel. We go to the police now, and they'll have no choice but to act." Daniel hesitated. He had uncovered corruption before, but this was different. This wasn't just an exposé for a newspaper. This wasn't about clicks or headlines. This was about lives, human and animal. And if they were right, the people behind this would do anything to keep it buried. He took a deep breath. No turning back. He grabbed his phone and dialed. The raid begins. Hours later, Daniel stood at a distance, watching as blue and red police lights cut through the cold darkness. The officers moved in quickly. Gates were forced open, locks broken, commands shouted. Then came the barking. Not aggressive, not warning, but desperate. The sound of dogs who had spent their lives in fear, suddenly hearing something they never expected. Hope. Lisa rushed forward, barely waiting for the officers to clear the way. Daniel followed, stepping into the main barn. The smell hit him first. Urine, blood, decay. And then he saw them. Rows of metal cages stacked on top of each other. Dogs in various states of suffering, some too weak to stand, others flinching at every movement. And in the center of it all, a pit stained dark with blood. Lisa turned away, pressing a hand over her mouth. "Oh my God! Daniel, these weren't just fighting dogs. They were being killed." Daniel swallowed hard. He had seen cruelty before. But this? This was something else. The officers worked fast, breaking open cages, pulling the dogs out, calling for transport. But then, a discovery that sent a chill through the entire room. More than just dogfighting. One of the officers emerged from Derek's office carrying a laptop and a thick folder of documents. Lisa took a step closer. "What is it?" The officer handed Daniel the file. "This isn't just an animal cruelty case, this is organized crime." Daniel flipped through the pages, his breath catching. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, coded messages, and then a list of names, politicians, business leaders, law enforcement officials. Lisa's voice was barely a whisper. They were protecting him. Daniel clenched his jaw. Not just that, they were funding him. And then, at the very bottom of the list, his own name. He went still. Lisa's eyes widened. "Daniel, that's the same date as the interview you missed." The realization hit him like ice water. If he had gone that night, he wouldn't be standing here now. Lisa exhaled shakily. They weren't just covering for Derek, they were eliminating threats. Daniel looked around at the wreckage of the kennel, the dogs being carried to safety, the man who had orchestrated all of it being loaded into a police car. He had saved the mother dog and her puppies that night, but now he realized they had saved him too. Chapter 6. A career transformed by compassion. The newsroom was buzzing. Phones rang non-stop, emails flooded in, and the office printer barely kept up with the demand for fresh copies of the morning edition. Daniel's article had taken the world by storm. The front page of the New York Chronicle bore his name in bold print, beneath the headline, "Unmasking the Shadow Trade, the illegal dogfighting ring tied to political corruption." His hands trembled slightly as he held the physical copy, reading the words that had already reached millions. His work had sparked national outrage. Lisa nudged him from the side, grinning. "You're famous." Daniel let out a slow breath. He hadn't done this for fame, but for the first time in his career, he felt like he had truly made a difference. Public reaction. Within hours of publication, social media exploded. Animal rights activists flooded the internet with calls for justice. Public figures, celebrities, and even politicians, some of whom had once ignored the issue, were now being forced to take a stance. Donations poured into animal shelters across the country. Petitions demanding harsher penalties for animal cruelty reached record numbers. And the most surprising part? The public wanted more. Daniel wasn't just a journalist anymore. He had become a voice for the voiceless. Recognition and respect. A few days later, Daniel sat across from his editor, expecting some form of reprimand. Instead, the older man chuckled, tossing a thick envelope onto the desk. "You're up for the National Investigative Journalism Award." Daniel blinked. "Wait, what?" The editor leaned forward. "Your story did more than expose a crime. It started a movement. You put people in power on notice. You think we're going to punish you for missing an interview? Hell, you just did the best reporting of your career." For a moment, Daniel was speechless. Recognition had never been his goal. He had simply followed the truth. But now, that truth was changing the world. A new path. As the weeks passed, the impact of his article continued to grow. Calls flooded in, from activists, from lawmakers, from people who wanted to share their own stories of injustice. Organizations dedicated to fighting animal cruelty reached out, offering resources, collaboration, and funding for future investigations. Daniel stood at the crossroads of something greater than journalism. This wasn't just a one-time exposé, this was a mission, and it all started with one choice, a single moment of compassion, standing in the middle of a snowstorm, staring down at a mother dog and her pups. Now he had a new purpose, and the fight was just beginning. Chapter 7. A Home Forever. The snow had begun to melt, revealing patches of brown grass beneath the frozen ground. Winter was finally loosening its grip on Jackson. But for Daniel, the change in seasons wasn't just about the weather. It marked the beginning of something new. No matter how many investigations he pursued, no matter how many cases he uncovered, this was the story that had changed everything. And now it was time to give that story the ending it deserved. A decision that felt right. Between the chaos of police reports, interviews, and newfound recognition, Daniel found himself coming home to the same sight every night. Bella curled protectively around her puppies Max and Luna on the thick blanket in his living room. At first he had told himself he was just fostering them until the right family came along. But with each passing day he found it harder to imagine his home without them. Lisa had seen it coming before he did. "You're keeping them," she said over coffee one morning, watching as Max tumbled over Luna in a playful wrestling match at Daniel's feet. He hesitated, but before he could respond, Bella let out a soft sigh and laid her head on his knee. It was all the answer he needed. Their new names, their new life. That evening, as he sat on the couch with the puppies curled up beside him, Daniel officially gave them names. "Bella," he murmured, stroking the mother dog's golden fur, "because you're strong and beautiful." She blinked at him, tail wagging softly. He turned to the pups. Max, the brave one, always the first to explore. Luna, gentle and watchful, always staying close. "Welcome home," he whispered. The moment that said it all. One morning, as the last patches of ice melted into the soil, Daniel left the back door open, letting Bella and her pups into the yard for the first time. For a brief moment, Bella paused. Daniel knew what she was thinking. She had been abandoned once before. She had been left to survive on her own. Would she leave now, given the chance? Then she did something that made his chest tighten. Instead of running, Bella turned back. She trotted toward Daniel, pressing her head against his hand. No hesitation, no fear, just trust. It was in that moment that he truly understood. He hadn't just saved them. They had saved him, too. A choice that changed everything. As he stood in the yard, watching Max and Luna chase each other through the wet grass, Daniel thought back to that night in the storm. He could have walked away. He almost had. Instead, he had made a choice that had unraveled a criminal empire, changed his career forever, and given him something he didn't even realize he needed, a family. He looked down at Bella. "Yeah," he murmured, scratching behind her ears. "I think I made the right call." Her tail wagged, and with one last nuzzle she ran off to join her pups. And for the first time in a long time, Daniel felt at peace. Lesson of the story. Sometimes the opportunities we think will define our future aren't part of our true destiny. The most meaningful moments often come when we least expect them. A single act of kindness can do more than just save a life. It can set off a chain of events that lead to something far greater than we ever imagined. Daniel thought he was making a small choice that night, but in saving Bella and her puppies, he uncovered a truth that needed to be told. Have you ever experienced a moment where choosing kindness led to something unexpected? Share your thoughts in the comments below. May God bless you for every act of compassion, big or small. And may you always find the courage to follow your heart. If this story touched you, don't forget to share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness can change the world.